Question: why should I shoot in RAW when it's so much easier to shoot in JPEG? I had the same question for the first couple years I was doing photography, and it ended up costing me image quality. Question: why bother shooting in RAW when I can just shoot in JPEG because it's so much easier to edit? I had the same question for the first year and a half or so I was doing photography. I'd just go out and shoot some JPEG photos and be like, hey, the camera does a pretty good job interpreting these. Why would I want to shoot in RAW? It's so much more work. Point taken. Here's the problem. When I would go post my pictures on Instagram, I'd be looking at my pictures and my image quality versus the vividness and the quality of some of the other images I saw, and they were tagging it with things like RAW, RAW this, RAW that, Instagram, hashtag RAW, you know what I'm saying? Me, I couldn't do the RAWs. I didn't really care too much about the hashtags, but my images did not look as good. So I started to wonder, why aren't my images looking as good? The answer is, you guessed it, ding ding ding, I was not shooting in RAW. I was shooting in JPEG. So the problem with that is the way the files are stored in the camera. If you shoot a RAW picture, I want to make this understandable because it was hard for me to wrap my head around when I first started shooting, and that's part of the reason why I only shot in JPEG, because I just didn't get it. I was like, RAW, okay, change the white balance in RAW. Like, okay, my white balance is pretty good. I don't need to change it. I don't feel like making something that's red blue. It's not something I feel like doing. I'm a landscape photographer. See, when you shoot in RAW, what your camera captures is what it sees. Your camera doesn't try to interpret it. It just captures everything that's going on. That's why the file size is so huge. It's like the camera's like, here Mike, here's all the stuff that I saw in its raw form. Do what you feel like with it, man. Change reality. Mix the colors, change the white balance, okay, fine. But here's another thing you can do that's cool. I also captured all this detail in the shadows that you can recover now because you didn't JPEG me. Whereas if I was shooting in JPEG, the camera would have just been like, okay, that whole area is black, it's all shadows, too dark, it's just going to be black. And then you try to recover it and it's just going to look like this big blur because the camera's extrapolating nothing because there's really nothing there. No data captured, man. So if you shoot in RAW, the data is captured. It's just the camera's not busy trying to think about what to do with it. So let me put an example on screen. Take a look at this. So I was walking along. I didn't really have any time to break out my filters because it was golden hour and the light was changing pretty quick. Plus, I had somewhere I wanted to go. I wanted to take a walk into the woods. Saw this image. I love the way the clouds looked. I love the way they were reflecting on the surface of the pond. But the shadows in the trees really kind of throw the image out of balance. I didn't want to lose any of the detail in the sky, so I decided to just expose for the highlights like they say to do. And I knew that because I was shooting in RAW, later on in post-processing, I could bring the shadows up in the trees and try to balance the image out a little bit. And I think it worked out. Okay, so that's the RAW image that I shot. Now, here's the same image after I bring up the shadows and recover that information, because remember, it's information. It's not a picture yet. It's information when you're shooting in RAW. So check this out. So here's our RAW file. In Lightroom Mobile, I brought the shadows all the way up to 100. As you can see, there's a little bit of noise in the image, but there's a lot of detail captured in this RAW format. Now, let me show you something else. Here's the same image we started with. Now I'm going to show you what happens when I bring up the shadows in JPEG in the JPEG file, and it doesn't look nearly as good. Check it out. And here's our JPEG. As you can see, it's very pixelated. There's not a lot of detail captured. Yeah, there's not a lot of noise either, but what you're seeing in this pixelation is a result of the camera compressing the scene into a JPEG format. It's going to limit our ability to bring these shadows up and really manipulate the image the way we want to. And here's the result. Shadows all the way to 100 in JPEG format versus RAW. As you can see, this just looks way more vivid, way more realistic. So huge difference between this RAW image with the shadows raised and the JPEG we saw previously. The JPEGs look a little cartoony. Here with the RAW image, it looks a lot more like an image we're standing there looking at in real life, And that's because all that detail is embedded in the image down to the pixel level, man. I'm getting my megapixels here. I can raise the shadows up without running into pixelation, and it's going to retain the sharpness because the detail's there. It gives me a lot more creative freedom to really make this image pop in Lightroom. So now, how does this translate to my images looking better on Instagram or wherever you post it? Facebook, Flickr, photo poster, whatever, I don't know. It translates to more detail in your image, actually using and translating and really showing more of those megapixels in your camera, because the information, the detail is just there where it's not with a JPEG. So cool. Things can look a lot more vivid. Your contrast, you can go a little heavier if you need to, because you don't have to worry about things pixelating and becoming funky, because you're not working with a camera rendering of a JPEG image. You're working with a RAW file that has the data there underneath. Cool.